Chapter 6 Deals. Rhea's heart raced in her chest. She could feel the dagger in its sheath at her side, like a hot coal. Even though nobody could tell what it was while it was hidden, she couldn't help but feel like every single eye in the darkness was watching her every move. This is the most incredible weapon I've ever seen in my life, and he just gave it to me? For free? Who in the 9 Underlands did I find? A shiver ran down Rhea's back. Arwen terrified her, but for all the wrong reasons. She would have taken him to be an adventurer if she'd run into him on the street, but his eyes burned with an intensity that Rhea had never seen before. Whenever he locked eyes with her, it felt like she was trying to stare down a volcano that was just waiting to erupt. The casual ease he'd handled the brothers' 6 made it absolutely clear that Arwen didn't belong in Milton. Rhea didn't know where he'd come from or what his goals were, and she didn't care. She'd lived on the streets for long enough to know that attaching herself to someone strong was the best way to stay alive. Unfortunately, she'd had pretty poor luck with that in the past. Her lips pressed thin, and she shook her head. Arwen cared so little about her that she didn't suspect she even properly registered in his eyes, and that was just fine with her. So long as he keeps his space, and I keep mine, I might be able to actually sit around and gather a little wealth for myself. I'm fed up with getting robbed every single time I gather up enough coin to get out of this shithole. The thought of coin sent a tiny sliver of guilt through Rhea. Distributed across her body in a dozen small pouches was well over 100 gold, all the savings she'd managed to keep over the years. It was a pittance in comparison to all the gold that had been stolen from her, but it was still everything she had. Arwen had been under the impression that she was broke, which was exactly what she expected. The less interesting she was to his eyes, the better. What she hadn't expected was for Arwen to offer to pay for her meal. 9 gold was far too much for 2 portions, but he'd tossed it to her like it was nothing. Rhea squished the guilt down. The way he treats money and magical items means he's got to be pretty damn rich. I'm not going to steal from him, but there's obviously no need for me to waste my coin when he's offering to feed me. That didn't make the guilt sting any less. Rhea's stomach rumbled again, the dull, gnawing pain in it reminding her that it had been far too long since she'd last eaten. Her eyes flitted around the street. There really wasn't much in the way of food in the area. Nothing that wasn't dead rats, anyway. Rhea grimaced. She would have loved nothing more than to head into the city proper and get a real meal, but that was a fantastic way to get herself killed. This street might have been haunted, but at least that meant it was abandoned. She'd made a few too many enemies among the guards and criminal underground alike. The brothers 6 had been assholes, but everyone had hated them, and they'd been strong enough to maintain control over their territory. Oh well. No use crying over spilled milk. I'll just head to one of the taverns at the edge of the slums. They're dangerous, but no more dangerous than pissing Arwen off. If I'm in and out fast enough, I doubt anyone will recognize me. Rhea set off, but she barely managed to make it more than 10 feet before a woman called out to her. Hey! You there! Rhea turned toward the voice. A tall woman with dark, bordering on purple skin waved to her. A ropey scar ran down one of the woman's eyes, and her dark hair stuck out against the splattered apron she wore. She might have been attractive if she wasn't covered with dirt and grime. Her hands dripped with a dark red substance, and the stains on her apron were a matching color. It was the woman who had insisted she was starting a tavern, yes? Rhea asked, putting a hand on the hilt of her dagger and turning her back to a wall. She wasn't about to get ambushed by some madwoman trying to stuff her into a stew. You look hungry, the woman said, coming to a stop on the other side of the street. How does someone look hungry? Rhea asked. I'm just wandering around. Right, the woman said, her voice so dry that it could have grated wood. Sure you are. I smell the hunger on your breath. Look, I don't know what you're selling, but I'm not interested, Rhea said with a shake of her head. Oh, and I'm not, Rhea's stomach rumbled, and the woman sent her a pointed glance. Just 1 gold. Come on, the woman offered. It'll be good. Who in the 9 Underlands charges an entire gold for a plate of food? That better be something fit for nobles at that price, and I'm pretty sure there aren't any nobles around here. I'm not buying it, Rhea said. Literally and figuratively, 1 gold? Are you insane? If anything, the woman just looked confused. Her brow furrowed and she pursed her lips. Oh, is that too much? Yes, it's too much. What about a silver? You aren't supposed to be guessing about this kind of thing. Why are you asking me? Rhea asked. She scanned the road, but it didn't look like anyone else was there. It was just the two of them. If this is a robbery, it's the strangest robbery I've ever seen. I don't know. I'm new to this, the woman said with a shrug. I'm Lilia. You are? Rhea heaved a sigh, and against her better judgment, she answered. Rhea, Dot. Look, you really shouldn't be doing this. You could get hurt. For some reason, Lilia seemed to find that amusing. The corner of her mouth quirked up in amusement, and she let out a small snort. Sure. Whatever. You want some food or not? Depends, Rhea said suspiciously. Are you going to try to convince me to follow you into a dark alleyway and strip first? Because I'm getting that kind of feeling from you. What? No, Lilia said, drawing the last word out and clearing her throat. She glanced over her shoulder, nodding to a small stone building that looked like it had once been a restaurant or storefront. It was directly in the shadow of a larger building, and Rhea couldn't see more than a foot into the darkness. Just in there. That is no better than a dark alleyway. If you think I'm following you in there, you're delusional. What if I bring the food out? Lilia asked, almost desperately. It's going to go bad if nobody eats it, and everyone keeps ignoring me when I approach them on the street. Please. Against Rhea's better judgment, she let out a heavy sigh and inclined her head. The pleading expression on Lilia's face finally managed to chip away at her. Fine, Jamie. 1 silver, and you're bringing it out here. Deal? Lilia nodded, then quickly started backing away, not taking her eyes from Rhea. She reached the edge of the door. Stay right there. I'll be right back. Rhea gave Lilia a fake smile and nodded. The other woman disappeared into darkness, and the urge to turn and sprint in the other direction gripped Rhea. She wasn't sure what stopped her. Perhaps it was the remnants of manners that she really had no place in keeping, or perhaps it was sheer curiosity. Today, though it was nearly tomorrow, if she was going by the position of the moon in the sky, had been interesting. A few minutes passed before Lilia came out carrying a large plate covered with a silver bowl. Rhea's eyes widened at the sight. It wasn't the fanciest bowl she'd ever seen, but it definitely resembled the plates that she'd occasionally seen, served in fancy restaurants. Only when Lilia got closer and properly stepped into the moonlight did Rhea realize what the bowl was. Rather than a smooth, glossy sheen, it was rough and bumpy. It looked like someone had hammered several sheets of trashy metal together. Nails jutted out of it at odd angles, and the whole thing was so roughly formed that she had to suspect it had been formed by hand rather than with tools. Lilia exclaimed, thrusting the bowl in Rhea's direction. All yours. Thanks, Rhea said hesitantly. She eyed the handle, which was a random stone that had been stabbed into the top of the bowl. Should I open it? I'll charge you extra if you try to eat the metal as well. Lilia didn't sound like she was joking. She's definitely off her rocker. Or really, really drunk. I don't smell any alcohol on her breath, though. Right, white. Logically, Rhea said with a small laugh. She grabbed the bowl by its makeshift handle and lifted it back. Her eyes widened. Sitting on the plate were several drumsticks. From what bird, Rhea wasn't sure. They were pretty large, and while they barely looked seasoned, they had salt and pepper on them. She licked her lips. As far as food here went, she was practically staring down a feast. Rhea pulled out the coins that Arwen had given her and handed Lilia a gold coin, taking the tray from her. You have change for that? Lilia took the coin, eyeing it hungrily. She glanced back to her, then reddened. No. You're my first customer. Figures. Rhea scrunched her nose and took one of the drumsticks, taking a bite out of it. Juice dripped down her chin as she chewed and swallowed, her eyes widening. It wasn't the greatest meal she'd ever had in her life, but it wasn't bad at all. Whoa! This isn't bad. Thanks. Lilia beamed. It's my 4th serving today. The others didn't go nearly as well. Why not? Rhea asked through a mouthful of meat. Well, the feathers were really scratchy on the first one, Lilia said, ticking a finger off on her hand. I removed them on the second bird, but its beak was kind of sharp. Also, I burnt that one black. Burnt the third one too. This one turned out great, though. So it did. What was the secret? I killed it before putting it in the oven. Rhea nearly choked, but she managed to keep the food in her mouth. She'd gone hungry too many times to waste it over anything like that. It was impossible to tell if Lilia was joking, but the woman looked dead serious. Oh. Well, congratulations, Rhea said. She took the other drumsticks from the plate and handed it back to Lilia. How about this? You give me 5 more meals like this, and you can keep the gold. Lilia's mouth split into a wide, hungry smile. A chill ran down Rhea's spine as an ill feeling gripped her. It felt like a shadow had fallen over her shoulders. She spun, but there was nobody behind her. When Rhea turned back, the feeling was gone. It sounds like we've got a deal, Lilia said with a nod. Could you tell anyone else you meet about my tavern as well? I'm trying to build up some business. Rhea did her best not to send a pointed glance around the abandoned street. She just nodded. Okay, we'll. I will. Great, Lilia said. I'll see you tomorrow then. With that, she turned and strode back into the darkness of her tavern. Rhea squinted at it, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't see into the darkness covering the windows. Tavern my ass. More like a dungeon. Shaking her head, Rhea turned and headed back toward Arwen's smithy. At least she'd managed to get them food for a fairly decent price, assuming Lilia hadn't scammed her. Another shiver ran down her spine, and she glanced over her shoulder. I just got a pretty good deal. Why does it feel like I just made a huge mistake? Chapter 7. Incident, huh? Arwen said, chewing and swallowing before speaking again. This is okay. I wasn't expecting there to be much of substance in the area. Me neither, Rhea admitted. Turns out, the lady that wanted to start a tavern was serious about it. She promised to give us 5 more meals, free of charge. The 2 of them had polished off the remaining drumsticks and had piled the bones between them. There weren't any chairs or a table in the smithy, so they just sat cross-legged on the floor. Arwen wasn't particularly bothered by the chill, but Rhea had progressively scooted closer and closer to the warmth of the hearth until she sat right beside it. "Did you get a chance to test my dagger?" Arwen asked, covering a yawn. The day was finally starting to catch up with him. "No, Arwen? I don't gut random people I walk by." "Ah, right. Good point. Yummy." Arwen rubbed his eyes, then pushed himself to his feet and wiped his hands off on his shirt. Napkins were another item on his growing list of necessities, but those could come after he patched the rest of the place up. He'd managed to forge a single sword while Rhea had been out. It wasn't anything special, but it looked like a sword and handled well enough. It would probably sell for a bit, so long as he could find a buyer. "I'm going to try to start making some money," Arwen said, stretching his arms over his head. "Keep an eye out for anyone who might need the services of a smith, would you?" Rhea squinted at Arwen, as if she were trying to determine if he was joking. "What?" Arwen asked. "Do you mean like horseshoes and the like? Or swords?" "Dunno. I haven't made a horseshoe yet, but I'll do whatever people want. I'm just trying to earn some gold right now. If anyone's in the market for something better, then great. I'll do that. In the meantime, I'll just keep forging things until I've got enough to set up a little stand somewhere." "That sounds like a good idea," Rhea said, sounding like she did not think it was a good idea in the slightest. "I'll keep an eye out." Arwen just nodded. He didn't much care if Rhea approved of what he was doing or not. The most important thing he could do right now was learn more about his class and keep his head low. Actually, scratch that. The most important thing I can do right now is find a goddamn bed. I'm exhausted. There were, unfortunately, no beds in the smithy. There wasn't anything soft either, or, at least, nothing soft that Arwen was eager to put his head on. He scrunched his nose in distaste and leaned against the wall, raising a hand to suck the flame from the hearth. "I am going to bed," Arwen said. "Don't rob me." Rhea paled, and she nodded hurriedly, raising her hands. "I wouldn't do something like that. I value my life." "Good," Arwen said. Then he closed his eyes and, minutes later, drifted off to sleep. Arwen dreamed of home. Not the home that the Adventurers Guild had built for him, but the small, one-story house that he'd lived in as a child. The home that had been his before he'd been summoned to this world by the Guild. His memories of it were fuzzy at best, but he still remembered more than he suspected he should have. He couldn't remember the faces of his parents, but he remembered their love. Arwen had a brother as well, Aiden. He couldn't remember his face either. Arwen wasn't even sure if any of them were still alive. Traveling between dimensions or universes, he still wasn't sure where it was that this world existed, had to take time. Maybe they were all already dead, or perhaps they still wondered what happened to him. Arwen had been 10 on the day he'd been ripped from his comfortable bed and found himself here. There had been a time when he'd longed to return, but that feeling was gone. Earth was his first home, but it was his home no longer. He was part of this world now, and yet he didn't even know if this world had a name. Amusingly enough, he knew more about Earth than he knew about the world around him now. Every waking moment he'd spent here, going from when he was summoned until when he struck down the Demon Queen, had been spent in training. Training tactics, fighting monsters to gain strength and rise in tiers, and training against the other adventurers. That was all he'd known. It had been for the best. Even if he hadn't had a childhood, he was fighting to protect the childhoods of everyone who lived within the kingdom of Lee. At least, that was what he thought he'd been doing. Now, he wasn't so sure. The guild had betrayed him without even blinking an eye, and the kingdom was at war once more. Why? What was the purpose? I did everything I was meant to. We should have been at peace. The answers didn't come. No matter what should have happened, the new war had started. Mercifully, there was someone else to deal with it now. Arwen couldn't help but wonder if the new hero was the same as he had been, another child stolen from their family on Earth, forced to give their life in trade for peace. Arwen wasn't sure how he felt about that. He didn't get a chance to find out. Sleep ripped itself away from him, and his eyes snapped open. Bolting upright with a start, Arwen leapt to his feet and grabbed for a sword that wasn't there. The smithy was empty. His heart slammed in his chest as he spun, searching for an enemy. His hand slowly lowered and he swallowed, shaking his head and letting out a slow breath. Sunlight filtered through the cracks in the smithy roof above him. He stretched his arms out, then popped his neck. The subjects of his dreams had already started to drift away from him, but that was fine. The past doesn't matter. I'm free now, and I'm going to abuse that to its fullest extent. This smithy is a perfect place to get started. It's got a lot that I need to get around to fixing, but I can already picture it in its full glory. A smile drifted across Arwen's face at the thought. He rubbed his hands together, warming them back up, and turned to the hearth. A new morning meant more time for work, and he had some swords to work on. He grabbed the last of his wood pile and tossed it into the hearth. Then, summoning his soul flame, Arwen sent a small orb of fire into the dry wood. It quickly started to crackle as the flame took, and he got to work with the bellows to bring the heat up faster. Once the flame was properly roaring, Arwen picked out another few pieces of metal and tossed them into the forge. He vaguely remembered one of the artificers making his weapons hammering layers of metal together, claiming they were stronger that way. No clue if he was right, but I've got nothing but time. Experimenting will be fun. Arwen waited until the metal was properly heated before setting the first one out on the anvil and laying into it with his hammer. As he had previously, Arwen quickly fell into a rhythm. His hammer rose and fell, striking the glowing portions of the metal. This piece seemed particularly determined to guide him in the right direction, and he made good time. Once it was flattened out, Arwen claimed another one of the pieces and hammered it out as well. He started to layer them, folding them in on themselves as he worked. It was getting harder to read the metal's intent, but there was just enough to follow by. It helped that every scourge and powered blow struck the metal like 100 individual strikes, drastically increasing the speed he worked at. Before long, the shape of a sword took form before Arwen. A grin stretched across his lips as he worked, feeling his desires mixing with those of the metal and starting to take form on the anvil before him. Arwen accelerated. This was going to be a magical weapon. He could feel it in his very bones. Every minute he made the world wait felt like a disservice. He worked for a little under an hour before the glow finally faded and Arwen let his hammer lower, breathing heavily as he took in his creation. There was no real hilt, and the handle was more of a spike than a comfortable grip. Arwen brought the blade over to his old whetstone and got to work, sharpening the blade. He was starting to get better at it, though his efforts still weren't exactly those of a master. But even after he raised the blade from the stone, nothing changed. Magic simmered within the metal, and yet it wasn't finished. Arwen's brow furrowed as he looked down on the sword. "Do I need to get you a proper handle?" Arwen murmured. "I suppose that would make sense. Can't call it a proper sword if you're holding it by that little nub." He scanned his shop, but he didn't exactly know any woodworking. Still, he wasn't about to be dissuaded. Arwen set the sword down on his anvil and departed the smithy, returning to the wooden house he'd looted the day prior. After a quick search, he spotted a piece of wood that looked to be in pretty good condition. He snagged it and headed back to his smithy without a second glance. As soon as he returned, Arwen used one of the swords he'd taken from the brothers to shave away strips of wood until he had something that vaguely resembled a hilt. Arwen then took the sword and held it to the anvil, pounding the wooden hilt in and at its bottom with his hammer. Each strike impaled the wood a little farther on the tang until it was all the way up to the blade. He took a step back, studying his creation. It didn't have a proper hilt, and he knew for a fact that he'd made it completely wrong. But, despite that, he felt the mesh tingle against his skin. Short sword, garbage quality has been forged. Forging a magical item has granted you energy. Arwen wasn't exactly surprised. The sword looked like it had been dropped down a flight of stairs while it was being forged, and the impurities in the metal had done a serious number on its potential. Arwen inspected the weapon closer to see what properties he'd imbued it with. Short sword, garbage quality brittle. This weapon has a chance of shattering on every blow. Upon shattering, the magical power stored within the weapon will be released in an instant, causing a minor magical explosion. A burst of laughter slipped out of Arwen's mouth. He carefully carried the sword over to the corner of his forge and set it down, taking care not to move it too aggressively. It wasn't a sword he was inclined to use himself, nor did he want to find out what would happen if he ate its power. But it wasn't bad as a throwing weapon. I suppose this is the detrimental quality my skill talked about. I wonder if the gemstone that was meant to kill me worked in a similar manner. Maybe forging a few more weapons with brittle would actually be a good way to research what happened, but I'd rather make something actually useful. Arwen studied the blade, pondering on what he'd done wrong. The first and easiest problem was obviously his materials. He needed better metal to work with, but that would be fixed when he started earning more money. The bigger issue was with his actual technique. He was pretty certain that he'd made the handle entirely wrong, and now that he thought about it, when he'd seen his smith making a sword for him, the man had twisted two metal rods together, rather than just hammering some scraps. Maybe I need to get some metal rods first. They would certainly lend themselves to the shape of a sword better. I think that should be my next step. Arwen was still nodding to himself when he heard gravel shift near the entrance of the smithy. He glanced over as Rhea walked inside, chewing on a chunk of meat on a bone. She froze as she saw Arwen. "You're awake." "Of course I'm awake," Arwen said dryly. "What else would I be?" "It's the middle of the day." Right. Yeah. Rhea cleared her throat. "It's just that you slept for like 2 days straight. I was wondering if you would wake up." 2 days. Arwen's eyes widened, but Rhea's word did make a certain amount of sense. "I suppose I was rather tired. Are you hungry?" "I didn't get food for you, but..." Arwen shook his head, surprised to find he meant it. His stomach didn't exactly feel full, but he didn't feel like he'd slept for 2 days at all. As a matter of fact, he actually felt rather good. Interesting. Do magical items sustain me for longer than normal food does? Does that mean I don't need to eat food at all? Eh? Even if I didn't, I still would. There aren't enough joys in life to skip out on one. Forget food for a moment. Did anything interesting happen? Arwen asked. Rhea crossed her arms behind her back and suddenly found one of the broken down walls fascinating. Nothing too interesting, no. Arwen's eyes narrowed. Out with it. I may have killed someone. Chapter 8, Journeyman, is that all? Arwen asked. Did they deserve it? Yeah. Then that doesn't seem particularly interesting. Who were they? A member of the Thieves' Guild. That got Arwen's attention. His eyes narrowed and he turned his full attention to Rhea. A large one? No, nothing like that, Rhea said hurriedly. She held her hands up defensively. A tiny one, and they aren't even from this area. They control the territory a few streets down, and they were poking around to see what had happened after the brothers, 6, got gutted. Arwen pursed his lips. I'm not seeing the part where this ended with you stabbing someone. Well, one of them tried to sneak into the smithy. I knew you were sleeping in it, and I didn't think you'd want to be bothered. I told him to turn around, but he ignored me, so I stabbed him. Huh, he. Pragmatic, Arwen said. He shrugged. Sounds like he had it coming. I appreciate it. Where'd you put the corpse? In the pile with the others. We should probably avoid making that a habit, Arwen mused. He stretched his arms over his head and yawned. Did he have anything on him? About 10 gold. Rhea pulled the pouch out and tossed it to Arwen. He caught it with a surprised blink. Why are you giving it to me? You're the one that killed him. Rhea gave Arwen a sheepish grin and shuffled her feet. 10 gold is what was left after I took my cut? You're the boss, so you get a split. Arwen tilted his head to the side, studying Rhea for a few seconds. Then he gave her a slow nod, sliding the pouch into a pocket. He needed gold if he was going to get better materials to work with. In that case, I'll take it. I suppose it's about time I went shopping for some supplies, Arwen said. He headed out of the smithy, and Rhea followed him. Arwen glanced at her over his shoulder. Say, how did that dagger work out? Did it change from the kill? No, Rhea said. I think I have to use it more. Arwen grunted. That's a disappointment. Oh well, I gave it to her for free, so it's not a big deal. No matter what happens, I'm making a sword that I can use myself today. A good one. Wang Ji. It doesn't have to be great, but it's going to be good. Rhea came to a stop as they reached the edge of the street. Arwen took several steps before he realized she wasn't following behind him. Are you not coming? I've got some more to take care of back home, Rhea said with a shake of her head. I'm still trying to establish relationships with the other people on the street. Arwen shrugged. Suit yourself. Try to make sure nobody gets their hands on the sword I left in the smithy. It's liable to blow up the moment someone starts swinging it, and I have no idea how big the explosion will be. It would be unfortunate if my smithy got damaged any further. Rhea's face paled. She looked back at the crumbling building, then gave Arwen a hurried nod. I'll make sure nobody touches it. Good, Arwen said. He set back off, leaving Rhea behind him. Arwen walked in as straight of a line as he could so it would be easy to retrace his steps. The alleyways weren't the easiest to traverse, but by the time he returned to the city proper, he was pretty sure he'd memorized the way back. It took a little under half an hour of aimlessly wandering around Milton until Arwen's nose led him to a market. The scent of freshly baked bread, greasy meat, and about a dozen other flavors he couldn't place hung low in the air. A small crowd bustled around the street. There weren't too many people, especially compared to the capital, but there were still more than enough to make the city feel alive. Arwen couldn't remember the last time he'd been in a city without an escort from the Adventurers Guild. For that matter, he couldn't remember the last time he'd been anywhere in the Kingdom of Lion without a guard of some sort. The smells were tempting, but Arwen only had a single thing on his mind at the moment. His eyes scanned the roofline of the shops near the market, and it wasn't long before he found what he was looking for, Smoke rose up from a small stone chimney near the end of the market. Arwen made his way over to it, and the crowd gave him a wide berth on his way over. He sniffed at his arms, but he didn't smell that bad. Weird. Arwen arrived at the smithy and stepped inside. A large man with a bushy black beard and muscles large from years of work sat at the counter, staring off at the wall in complete boredom. The smith nearly leapt out of his chair when he spotted Arwen. The man's eyes narrowed, and he rose to his feet, brushing himself off. "What do you want?" the smith asked in a brusque tone. "I don't give handouts." "Handouts?" Arwen squinted at the man. "Why would I need handouts? I'm here to buy some materials." The blacksmith blinked. "You are? You should have said so. My name is Taylor. Please feel free to take a look around." "You just didn't look much like the buy-in sort. What's that meant to mean?" Arwen looked down at his clothes. They were dirty, sure, but it didn't look like they were that out of place. He looked back to the blacksmith. "Do I have dirt on my face?" "Well, it looks like you slept in a pile of soot." Arwen reached up and touched his cheek. His fingers came away gritty and he grimaced. "Ah, yay, way, see? Yes, that would do it." "No matter. Do you have metal rods?" "Rods? You don't want a weapon?" "Just rods," Arwen said firmly. "Or any sort of metal scrap that isn't complete trash, now that we're at it." "I'm trying to learn forging." The smith's eyes narrowed, and Arwen realized he might have made a mistake. Telling someone that you were going to start up a business in competition with them wasn't really the greatest idea. "You want me to sell to competition?" Taylor asked. Arwen scratched the back of his neck. "Yeah. Your work should speak for itself, right? No shame in competition if they're worse than you." "You're a shameless one, aren't you?" "Yes, I am. I've also got 10 gold here, and I'm willing to spend as much of it as I need to for some rods. Save us both the trouble of dancing around and tell me if you're willing to sell or not. If you aren't, I'll just find someone else to give them to me." Taylor's frown split into a mildly amused grin and turned, heading into the back of his store. A few minutes later, he came back out with 4 metal rods and a small tarp bag bulging at the seams. He thumped everything down on the counter. "If you're going to get your hands on it regardless, I might as well make some profit in the meantime," Taylor said with a shake of his head. "I'm not giving you the best price, though. You want a better one. Go find someone else." "I respect the honesty." Arwen tossed Taylor the bag of coins, and the smith counted everything before giving Arwen a curt nod. "And I respect the balls. Next time, find someone else to buy from." "I'm not outfitting my competition." "Noted," Arwen said, gathering up everything he'd bought. "Thanks." Taylor just shook his head. As Arwen headed out the door, the other smith called out to him. "Say, where are you opening up shop? It better not be too close to me." "I'm not exactly sure," Arwen replied. "It's somewhere in an alley. I'll let you know once I rebuild it." He headed back out onto the street, leaving Taylor gawking at his back. He had what he needed, and now all he had to do was head back and get back to work. A grin crossed Arwen's lips, and he increased his pace, striding back into the dark alleys and toward his smithy. Fortunately for his dwindling patience, Arwen didn't have to walk long. He'd memorized the way back pretty accurately, and he soon found himself back on the alleyway that wasn't quite home yet. But as he approached his smithy, a frown crossed over Arwen's face. There were noises coming from inside it that definitely weren't meant to be there, in particular, voices that he didn't recognize, I suppose I should have expected this. Arwen ducked through the crumbling doorway and stepped into his building. Rhea stood with her back to the wall and her dagger in her hands, facing off against two men wearing loose green clothes. As soon as Arwen entered, one of them spun toward him. "We're not open for business yet," Arwen said, setting the materials he'd purchased from Taylor down on the ground. "Get out." "Who are you?" one of the men asked. When asking a name, it is polite to introduce yourself first. "Jin," the man said, putting a hand on the hilt of a short sword at his waist. "Your turn." Arwen Dot. "Pleasure to meet you, Jin. Now get the hell out of my smithy." "This is your smithy?" Jin's head tilted to the side. Arwen was more focused on Rhea, who looked like she was about half a step away from stabbing Jin or his compatriot. Normally, he wouldn't have particularly minded, but that would mean he'd get even more blood on his floors. "Yes," Arwen said. "Is there a problem with that?" "Not at all." "We'd be pleased to leave," Jin said, inclining his head and giving Arwen a slight bow. "Rex and I don't have any interest in bothering you. We're just after the little rat." Arwen's eyes flicked to Rhea, who swallowed. Her grip tightened on the dagger. "There seems to be a misunderstanding here," Arwen said. Oh. What is it?" Jin tilted his head to the side, shifting his stance. It was a subtle move, but Arwen had been in enough fights to recognize it. Jin knew how to fight. At least, he knew more than the Brothers Six had. "Anything that happens to be inside my smithy is part of my smithy," Arwen said. He jerked his chin in Rhea's direction. "And she is inside my smithy. Just leave, so I don't have to get blood on my floor, would you?" "Are you sure about that?" Jin asked, his eyes narrowing. He drummed his fingers on his sword. "You're a big guy, and you clearly know how to carry yourself. But you're sticking your nose where it doesn't belong. This is guild business." "Not my guild," Arwen said. "And not my problem. You want to start shit, then do it outside. I'm going to be pissed if I get more blood on my floors." Jin's gaze flicked down to the dry splotches near the forge. His lips pressed thin, and he snapped his fingers. Rex took a step back, sheathing his blade. Arwen was actually somewhat impressed. He fully expected the men to attack. "Very well," Jin said. He didn't say another word as he swept past Arwen. Rex trailed after him, giving Arwen a glare before stepping out the front door. Arwen waited until he heard their footsteps fade down the street before he turned to Rhea. "Huh? I'm surprised they had the brains not to attack," Arwen said. "Lucky me. The floors are spared." "That wasn't brains," Rhea said, biting her lower lip and staring out the door. "Jin's one of the Thieves' Guild enforcers. He has a bit of a grudge against me, but he's not stupid. He knows you killed the Brothers Six, so he doesn't want to get into a fight with you." Arwen grunted. "Clever thieves." "Lovely. At least he left." "He didn't leave," Rhea said, swallowing heavily. "But we probably should. Jin is going to show back up with more people. He hates losing. The only reason he backed off is because he felt like he was outnumbered." "More people? I thought you said this was a small guild." "I may have over-exaggerated their smallness," Rhea said, clearing her throat. "They have 30 members." 30 members? Arwen exclaimed. "What the hell did you get me wrapped up in? And what is it with you and getting into trouble? Every time I leave, you manage to get into something new." "It's not new," Rhea protested. "I just have a bunch of old things that kind of keep stacking up on each other." I haven't done anything that bad recently. You stabbed someone. They had it coming. So. Okay, fair. You aren't avoiding this, though. Answer the question. Why is a thieves' guild pissed at you? Arwen asked. And don't tell me it's because of the smithy. I'm getting the feeling it isn't the shitty old building they care about. They followed you here. Rhea's shoulders slumped, and her eyes fell to her feet. I'm sorry. They did. I gathered as much. I want to know why. Well, long story short, I may have stolen something from them. What did you steal, Rhea? Arwen demanded. Stop hedging around it and tell me. Rhea bit her lower lip, then walked up to Arwen and leaned in close to whisper into his ear. The only key to a journeyman tier dungeon. Chapter 9. Opportunity. It had been a long time since Arwen had last thought about dungeons, but he was surprised to find that the word brought up warm memories. He'd spent the majority of his earlier years in this world within the dungeons together with the men and women that had once been his friends. As far as Arwen had learned, dungeons were areas where the mesh got caught up and layered over itself, growing unstable. Monsters were lured to the location and the mesh fed them, letting them grow in strength and turning their flesh and bodies valuable. Most times, dungeons vanished forever once someone went through and killed everything within them. The mesh would unravel, returning to its proper form, and whoever had cleared the dungeon would be the only one to benefit from it. But in some situations, the bundled mesh was so tight that it could become permanent. Anything that spent extended periods of time within these areas grew warped with power, and there was enough magic present that the dungeons would reform themselves and the monsters within them over periods of time. Dungeons such as those were incredibly valuable and highly monopolized by both the mesh and people alike. Many of them had limited entrances to keep the dungeons from being overcleared and risking the dungeon unraveling. Some of those entrances were man-made, and some of them seemed to be placed there by the mesh itself. Arwen had never properly understood the mesh's purpose. At times, it seemed to be to force people to grow and pursue their goals. At other times, it seemed as if it rejoiced in causing chaos and preventing peace from ever cementing itself. Nobody had ever given him a straight answer for what the mesh truly was, but he knew one thing for certain: it granted power. A journeyman dungeon wouldn't have been of any interest to me when I was still the hero. It's only one tier up from apprentice. Things are different now, though. This is an incredible find. And if there's actually only a single entrance, it's an incredible training ground and way to generate both money and materials. Granted, I'd actually have to be able to survive it. As things stand, I can wipe the floor with some nameless goons, but I'd get slaughtered if I tried to solo a dungeon twice my tier. Arwen realized that he'd drifted off in thought, and Rhea was staring at him, growing progressively more and more worried by his lack of reaction. I know I should have told you earlier, but I was worried, Rhea started. This is a huge opportunity, Arwen said, cutting her off. I don't blame you for not sharing your secrets. I have already shared mine, but if you're willing to share that dungeon, there could be a lot we could get from it. Have you checked the dungeon out yourself? Rhea blinked at Arwen's excitement, but it wasn't long until her frown returned. No, I haven't. The Thieves' Guild is watching the entrance, so I haven't had a chance. But do you mind if I ask a question? You can ask, but I may not answer. I know you're pretty strong, but are you able to do a dungeon at Journeyman tier? I don't doubt you or anything, but aren't you some sort of smith? I am a smith, yes. What of it? Well, a smith doesn't have any battle skills. No matter how strong you are, a journeyman dungeon might be too much. I don't even have a class, so there's no way I'd be able to do anything. I suppose we could try to earn enough money to hire someone, but then they might just take all the good stuff themselves. I don't have any mirror crafting class, though. I've got a unique one. I guess that may or may not be a good thing. The unique modifier doesn't necessarily imply something is better or worse, just that it's different from the standard. Only time will tell, but I'm pretty sure Living Forge has more benefits than drawbacks. Either way, I still have some of my titles. With a little preparation, I think we could handle the dungeon. When I was still the hero, training would have handled that. But now, no. Training wouldn't hurt, but it's not what I need. If I want to become strong again, I need to build myself a set of equipment so strong that it can let me keep up with the combat classes. We'll burn that bridge when we get to it, Arwen said. I'm confident we'll be able to handle the dungeon at some point, but you were right to keep this secret. I trust you've got the key stashed somewhere safe, where nobody can find it. Rhea cleared her throat loudly. Arwen's eyes narrowed. I'm not asking you to tell me where it is. I'm not going to rob you. Just make sure someone doesn't nick it while we're getting ready. Reaching up to her chest, Rhea pulled the top of her shirt back and pulled out a key dangling on a thin necklace. I, kind of just have it here. I didn't think about stashing it anywhere. Put that away, Arwen said hurriedly. He glanced at the entrance of the smithy to make sure nobody was there, not relaxing until the key was hidden once more. Holding on to it is fine. Just don't lose it. We can get a lot out of it. So, it's definitely a we thing now? Rhea asked, giving him a cheeky smile. Don't get too big for your britches. You're the one that dragged me into this, Arwen pointed out, but he couldn't keep a small smile from passing over his own features. And I've dealt with worse than you. I'm not opposed to a partnership so long as you don't go stabbing me in the back or doing anything overly stupid. You or make me share more about myself? Arwen let out a burst of laughter. No, Rhea. Why would I do that? If I asked you to spill your secrets, then I would have to do the same. I don't care about your secrets, so long as they don't affect us. Shifting uncomfortably, Rhea glanced to the side. Arwen's eyes narrowed. What else have you done? You might have to be more specific. How many enemies do you have that are actively looking for you? Rhea raised a hand, ticking fingers off on it. She quickly ran out of fingers and swapped to the other hand. Finding that one also lacking, she started pulling a shoe off. The other shoe soon followed after it, and Rhea finally raised her gaze back to Arwen's, biting her lip. Arwen? Yes? Don't get mad, but I lost count. Arwen heaved a sigh. Figures. Maybe we're more alike than I thought. What do you mean? Never mind, Arwen said. He waved at her shoes. Put those back on before you step on something sharp on accident, would you? Do any of your enemies other than the Thieves Guild know where you are? No, they shouldn't. I'm sorry. I should have told. Good. Keep it that way. I already spent enough time on this. I'm going back to work. Could you get dinner? Rhea froze midway through pulling her socks back on, looking up at Arwen in shock. You're not kicking me out? Of everyone I've run into in the past few days, you've been the most reliable. So long as things stay that way, I don't care who your enemies are. Just try to give me a little forewarning the next time, would you? Yes, sir. Rhea saluted him, then scrambled to her feet and gave him another salute. Arwen died. Right. Sorry. I'm down. Rhea slipped out the door, and Arwen shook his head, a small smile on his face. Blake would have loved her. He'd been excited about just about everything, and he could barely remember a time when Blake hadn't been smiling. Even his last breath had passed with a grin sprawling across his lips. "Could have used your help right about now," Arwen muttered into the air. "But maybe this is your way of sending it, eh?" There was no response, but Arwen wasn't so sure he hadn't already gotten one. Still wearing a small smile, he turned back to his forge and cracked his neck. There was a lot of work he had to get done, and the Thieves' Guild wasn't going to sit around forever. 8 days flitted by, and the Thieves' Guild still had yet to return. That was perfectly fine with Arwen. He barely left his forge, and Rhea proved to be capable in more ways than one. She didn't just bring him food, she also woke him up in the mornings and made sure he went to sleep early enough to avoid passing out for another few days at once. Beyond that, she also continued to procure a steady supply of metal scrap. It wasn't the highest quality material, but it was a lot better than the other trash that Arwen had to work with, and it was free. Arwen didn't ask where Rhea had gotten the materials, and she didn't offer an answer. He was going through supplies far too quickly to be picky, but his efforts were to great effect. 2 piles of swords, daggers, nails, and other assorted objects started to form beside Arwen. The first, and largest, of them was full of garbage that was completely worthless and had no magical properties. None of them had been magic, but they looked like real weapons. The rate he was improving at was, at least to his eyes, incredible. He'd been successful in making only a single magical item in his 3 days' work, and that had been a garbage-quality magic dagger that he'd promptly eaten upon feeling the pangs in his stomach. "It looks like I need to eat an item about once every 4 or 5 days. That should be sustainable, but I need to build up a bigger backlog of things to eat in case something goes wrong." Arwen's hammer rung against steel as he thought, putting the final touches on the blade he'd been working on that morning. This particular piece had been singing him a song that was reaching its final notes, and Arwen was particularly optimistic about its chances. But if he was going to make a sword that he could actually be proud of, he needed to do the full process, not just the first half. Arwen held the glowing hot blade before him and glanced around in search of liquid. There wasn't anything in the smithy that he could use, which was probably a problem he should have rectified before starting his work. Arwen headed outside, walking around the back of the smithy and down the road. Luck must have been smiling upon him. After just a minute or two of walking, he spotted a deep puddle near the ditch at the side of the road. It was only a little longer than his body and barely as wide as his arm, but there was a 1/4 foot of water in it. Better than nothing. Arwen plunged the blade into it. Steam erupted forth and the water bubbled furiously as it cooled the blade. He held it beneath the water, enjoying the faint massage of roiling water against his hand. Only once the bubbles resided did Arwen lift the blade free. It looked like a blade. He wasn't sure what else to say. If he'd known more about smithing, he probably would have shuddered at the weapon before him, but in this particular instance, ignorance would be a blessing. Arwen headed back to the smithy, partially finished sword in hand. He took a slightly curved metal tube that he'd formed the previous night and slid it over the tang of the blade before taking the whole thing over to the hearth and sticking it into the flames. After letting them heat, Arwen brought the sword back to his anvil. He grabbed some nails and drew on Scourge to hammer them straight through the metal, holding the hilt in place beneath the crossguard. He then lumbered over to a small roll of leather that Rhea had procured and wrapped the hilt with the leather. As soon as Arwen's hands lifted off the sword, he felt the tingle of the mesh race across his skin. A grin split his lips as magic swirled before his eyes. Short sword, average quality has been forged. Forging a magical item has granted you energy. Achievement, more than average has been earned. More than average, awarded for forging your first average quality item. Effects. One skill in your next skill selection has been upgraded to unique. This achievement will be consumed upon choosing your next skill. A faint feeling of strength seeped into Arwen's body, and his grin grew wider. There were a very high number of adventurers who believed that the most important way to get stronger was purely reaching higher tiers and upgrading their class. While that was certainly one way to get stronger, Arwen's years of combat had shown him that it was far from the most important one. The actual key to power was getting as many achievements and titles as possible, which would give the highest chance to get the best skills. There was no limit to how many of them someone could get per tier, but there were only 10 levels per tier. Unfortunately, Arwen had only learned that late into his career as the hero. I always did wonder why the Adventurers Guild never told me about how important getting good skills in each tier was. Now that I suspect they tried to kill me, it makes me wonder what purpose they really summoned me for. It clearly wasn't to be the strongest warrior humanity had, or they wouldn't have withheld information. One day, I'll find out. For now, I've got another chance. I'm all the way back at apprentice tier, which means I have all the opportunities in the world to improve my skills. I can be stronger than I ever could have been as the hero. But that would come later. He picked the sword up and held it out before him, letting the mesh tingle against his skin. For now, it was time to see what magic his first well-made sword possessed. Chapter 10. More customers, short sword, average quality ringing blows. This item remembers the ringing of the man who forged it. While wielding it, you may use a small amount of your magical energy to imbue your attacks to leave a faint resonance behind upon impact. Repeated strikes against the same area will cause increased damage. Hungry, this item hungers for power and will consume more magical energy than necessary in order to function. Would you look at that, Arwen mused, holding the sword up to the light. That's actually rather useful. Not bad. Not bad at all. It still managed to pick up a detrimental property, but considering the chance of that is 80% right now, I don't think I can complain. It's good to know I can get 2 different properties on a single weapon. Whoa. Rhea's voice came from behind him. Arwen turned, finding Rhea standing in the doorway of the smithy, her eyes wide. He lowered the sword, then picked up the sheath from one of the swords he'd taken from the Brothers Six, swapping the blade out for his own. Staring is impolite, Arwen said. Sorry. Rhea shook her head, blushing. I just saw the swords you were making before. No offense, but they sucked. You're getting better at a crazy rate. Were you just screwing around before? Arwen looked over to the pile of garbage, then chuckled. No. I'm just a fast learner. Right, Rhea said, clearly not believing him. Arwen's stomach rumbled before either of them could say anything else, and it was Rhea's turn to laugh. Time for lunch? I'd say so, Arwen agreed. I hoped you'd gone out to get it. I did, but Lilia actually said I wasn't allowed to take food out anymore. She's trying a new strategy of getting people to stay in her tavern longer. Arwen squinted at Rhea. You say people, as in plural. Does she actually have other customers? She's got one. I've seen a drunk guy passed out in her shop every once in a while. That's it, though. She's just really adamant that she can't have the right atmosphere if people are always coming in and leaving right after. I'd say the first problem is that she's trying to build an inn on the least populated street in the city, Arwen said dryly. He brushed his hands off on his shirt, then shrugged. Her cook seems to be improving, though. Perhaps it's worth a trip out of the old building. Arwen glanced around his smithy, but there wasn't much he really had to put away or move. He took a moment to take his potentially explosive magical sword and bury it beneath the pile of garbage before following Rhea out of the open doorway, stepping carefully to avoid slipping on the rubble. I really need to start looking into improving this building. It's depressing. Do you think we can make this place look a bit better soon? Rhea asked as they walked down the street, reading Arwen's thoughts perfectly. Or at least add some beds. I'm not unused to sleeping on the floor, but I don't normally stay in one spot this long. I mean, I'm not really bringing in any money, so I can't tell you what to do, but I'd say you brought in more than enough supplies to give you some say over what we do, Arwen said, raising a hand to stall her. And I agree. Some comfort would be nice, and improving the smithy will be important if I want more people to come. I think the first step will be finding a way to sell some of my work, though. I need a wooden cart or something of its like that I can bring to a more populated area of the city. I'll keep my eyes out. Arwen suppressed a laugh. I need to get one the proper way, Rhea. I don't want to have someone chasing me down the streets because they recognize the cart I'm selling out of. Oh, Rhea said, her face falling. Right, yeah, I mean. They came to a stop at the end of the street before a building that was somehow in worse shape than Arwen's smithy. He squinted through the empty window frames, but it was so dark inside that he couldn't make a single thing out. This is the tavern? Arwen asked doubtfully. It looks like a morgue. It's a bit weird looking, Rhea admitted. I try not to stay inside too long. If I'm being honest, it kind of gives me the creeps. It's still a tavern, though. Or, Lilia is good at cooking. That makes it a tavern. Right? Rhea sounded like she was hoping that Arwen would convince her. He let out a long-suffering sigh and shook his head. Well, the food certainly wasn't bad. Might as well take a look. Arwen stepped through the doorway, ducking slightly to avoid hitting his head. He squinted into the darkness, just barely able to make out the room beyond. Broken tables and chairs littered the floor. A counter sat at the back, mostly rotted through and collapsed. There was a single stool in front of the counter, and it didn't look like it could hold much weight. Piles of glass shards and other debris had been swept into the corners, just barely visible in the faint light that came from a doorway at the back. Faint scuffles came from through the doorway, as well as the muted noise of what Arwen suspected to be humming. Rhea cleared her throat. Lilia? Are you here? I came back to get lunch. Her words echoed through the darkness, making Arwen wince. He superstitiously glanced over his shoulder, putting a hand on the hilt of his sword. The back of his spine prickled, and his hair stood on end. Something about the tavern set him on edge. The shadows were too long, and it was far too silent and dark. Much, much too dark. It wasn't the same as his smithy. That building had been equally as run down, but it didn't feel nearly as ominous. Rhea didn't seem particularly concerned, so she was either completely oblivious to the sensation or had just gotten used to it. Who's asking? A female voice called. It was followed by several choked coughs, and a curse smoke curled out of the doorway and trickled out through the cracks in the precarious ceiling. That's Lilia, Rhea whispered before raising her voice to call back. It's me, Rhea. I came back for lunch. You told me to, remember? Oh, right. There was a short pause. The smoke pouring out of the kitchen intensified, and Rhea exchanged a glance with Arwen. There were some hurried thuds, followed by a loud crunch. The smoke stopped. Do you mind waiting a bit? I may have set lunch on fire. That's fine, Rhea said before Arwen could say anything. She walked up to the counter, ignoring the small pieces of debris that crunched beneath her feet with every step. and carefully sat down on the stool. It creaked precariously. "Sorry," Rhea said. "Only one chair right now." "So I see," Arwen said dryly. "And I suspect there are no chairs that hold my weight." "Hold on," Lilia called from within the kitchen, her tone gaining a panicked note to it. The shuffling from behind the wall grew more aggressive. "Did you bring someone else with you? Is that a new customer?" "It's just Arwen." "You've been cooking for him a while already," Rhea explained. "You don't have to worry about it." "Oh no. This is a horrible precedent," Lilia said. There was another crash, followed by a series of curses. "I'll have food out as soon as possible, I promise. Just wait a little longer." "I thought she wanted more customers?" Arwen asked, whispering to avoid stressing the poor woman any further. "She does," Rhea whispered back. "But I think she's also worried about disappointing them, you know? I don't really know her that well, but she clearly cares a lot about what people think of her cooking. She plied me with questions about how we liked the food every time I got something from her." Arwen grunted. He walked up to the counter beside Rhea, glancing around for somewhere to sit before promptly giving the idea up. There really was only a single stool, and it definitely wasn't holding his weight. He put a hand on the bar, leaning gently against it to make sure it wouldn't collapse beneath him. When the wood didn't make too many creaks of protest, he allowed himself to put the rest of his weight against it. The uneasy feeling still gripped him, but at this point, his desire to eat something was greater than his concern. He highly doubted that there would be anything truly dangerous in this backwater city, and even though he didn't seem to need real food anymore, he still relished the taste. Minutes ticked by. Arwen listened to Lilia's hurried cooking through the wall. He could hear her muttering to herself, but the exact words were lost. Rhea didn't seem to mind the wait, and was busying herself by organizing tiny pieces of broken wood on the counter before her. "Have you ever been in here before?" Arwen asked. "Only to wait while the food was getting made," Rhea replied, glancing up from her artwork. "Why?" "Just wondering." "It feels a bit concerning," Arwen said. Rhea scrunched her nose. "Oh yeah, wine, yeah. I felt like that at first, too. I haven't gotten stabbed yet, though. That makes it better than most of the places I've been in." "Your standards are far too low," Arwen informed Rhea, shaking his head. She did have a point, though. Nobody had tried to stab them. Yet, Arwen was about a second from drumming his fingers on the countertop in impatience when Lilia finally called out to them again. "Okay. I'm so sorry about the wait, but I've got your food ready." Lilia hurried out of the kitchen, her dark purple skin nearly invisible in the dim light. It looked vaguely familiar, but Arwen didn't have much time to process it. He was much more interested in the food she was carrying. She moved so quickly that Arwen's eyes could barely track her, but she came to a stop on the other side of the bar when she went to put 2 steaming plates of fried rice down before them. "Enjoy," she said cheerfully. Arwen's gaze lifted to Lilia's, and he froze. He recognized the scar that ran along her right eye. He recognized her features, even as covered in grime as they were. And as her expression shifted from excitement to shock, Arwen knew without a doubt that she recognized him. Standing before him, 2 plates of fried rice in her hands and an award-winning smile on her face, was the Demon Queen.